On the 13th of September, 2013, two cavers lowered themselves feet first into a crack in a South African hillside that narrows to 18 centimeters. Stephen Tucker and Rick Hunter were not looking for a human species. 30 meters below the surface, in total darkness, their lamps found a floor scattered with bone. Every specialist who examined those bones over the next 2 years reached the same conclusion about their age: 2 million years, give or take. The anatomy was unambiguous. When the laboratory results finally came back in 2017, the number was wrong by more than 1.5 million years. For 100 years, the shape of a hominin skeleton has been used as a clock. Curved fingers meant old. Small brains meant early. What came out of that chamber broke the clock. And nobody has yet explained how a body this ancient was still walking around at the same moment we were. The cave sits in the cradle of humankind, roughly 50 kilometers northwest of Johannesburg. It is not remote. It is not unexplored. Fossil hunters had been working that limestone for 90 years, and the surrounding sites had produced some of the most important hominin material ever recovered from Africa. The system itself had a name, Rising Star, and a map, and a steady traffic of recreational cavers who had been going down into it for decades. It was, by any reasonable measure, known ground. Getting to the chamber is a different matter. The route runs through a flattened crawl the cavers call Superman's crawl, because the ceiling is low enough that you have to extend one arm ahead of you and drag yourself through on your side. That opens into a steep climb along a jagged fin of rock called the Dragon's Back. At the top of it, the floor gives way into a vertical fissure 12 meters deep. In places, that fissure is 18 centimeters wide. There is no way to descend it except feet first, sideways, exhaling to compress the ribcage, with rock touching the chest and the spine at the same time. At the bottom, the passage opens out, and the floor was covered in bone. Lee Berger, a paleoanthropologist at the University of the Witwatersrand, understood immediately that he had a problem no funding body had ever been asked to solve. The deposit needed excavating by qualified scientists. The entrance would admit almost no qualified scientists. He advertised for people with 3 qualifications at once: caving experience, a postgraduate degree in a relevant field, and a body slender enough to pass through 18 centimeters of dolomite. 6 applicants met all 3. All 6 were women. The press called them the underground astronauts, and the name stuck, though the woman who led the excavation, Marina Elliott, has been fairly dry about the glamour of spending 3 weeks lying on a cave floor in the dark. They worked in 2 seasons, November of 2013 and March of the following year. 21 days of excavation in total. Above ground, a command tent relayed live video from helmet cameras so the specialists who could not physically reach the site could direct the work in real time. What came out of that chamber was more than 1,550 individual specimens representing at least 15 individuals: infants, juveniles, adults, at least one elderly individual. Almost every bone in the human skeleton was represented, most of them multiple times over, in a state of preservation that had no business existing in a cave floor. Consider what that number actually means. In 90 years of intensive work, every other fossil site in southern Africa combined had produced less hominin material than came out of that single chamber in 21 days. It was not the only one. In 2017, the team announced a second chamber, more than 100 meters away through separate passages, which they named Lasidi. It held at least 3 more individuals, including a skull and skeleton complete enough to be given a nickname, Neo. A third deposit was identified later still, and in every chamber, the same absence. No stone tools, no hearths, no animal bones lying alongside them, no antelope, no rodents, nothing that would suggest a predator had dragged carcasses in or that a natural opening had funneled unlucky animals down. Nothing at all except Dinaledi. That absence would turn out to matter more than any single bone they recovered. The excavators came out of the ground with the most complete picture of an extinct human species ever assembled from one location. Then the anatomists looked at it and found a skeleton built out of 2 different epochs. The simplest way to hold what follows is to keep 2 columns. Put the traits that belong to the ancient end of our family in one, the Australopithecines and the earliest members of our own genus. Put the traits that belong to the recent end in the other, the Neanderthals and ourselves. Every hominin skeleton ever described fills one column faster than the other. Naledi fills both at the same rate, and it does it inside a single body. Start with the size. The adults stood around 144 centimeters, which is 4 feet 9. They weighed somewhere near 40 kilograms. That makes them the second smallest human species known, behind Homo floresiensis in Indonesia. But floresiensis has an explanation. It lived on an island, and island populations shrink. Naledi lived on the African mainland, with no barrier around it and no shortage of space. There is no easy reason for it to be that small. Then the hands. Tracy Kivel, working at the University of Kent, published the analysis in 2015. The wrist bones are effectively modern. So is the thumb, which is long and heavily muscled, the architecture that allows forceful precision gripping, the kind of hold you need to work a stone core. The other 4 fingers are longer and more curved than those of any Australopithecine yet measured, including Lucy. Curved fingers are for hanging. They are the signature of an animal that spends serious time off the ground. Both sets of features are attached to the same knuckle. Above the hands, the pattern holds. The shoulder blades sit high and are angled for suspension, for a body that hangs from its arms. The lower ribcage flares outward in the old Australopithecine shape, rather than tapering into a barrel like ours. The pelvis flares too. From the waist up, this is an animal built to climb. From the waist down, it is not. William Harcourt Smith led the work on the foot, also in 2015, and the foot is almost entirely modern. Arched, stiffened through the midsection, built for pushing off. Above it, the shin bone is lengthened, the fibula is slender, the kneecaps are broad, and the ridge on the back of the thigh bone where the buttock muscles anchor is heavily developed. That is the equipment of a committed walker. Naledi did not merely manage on the ground, it covered distance there, with a stride that would be difficult to tell from our own. Consider what that combination actually means for a living animal. Climbing gear above, walking gear below, in one body, with no transitional compromise between them. Southern Africa at the time was drying. The forests that had covered the region for millions of years were breaking apart into open savanna, and the trees that remained stood further and further apart. A creature that needed trees for safety and had to cross open ground to reach the next one would want exactly this skeleton. Curved fingers to get up, modern legs to get across. That reconstruction is reasonable. It also has almost nothing to do with the reason this species is famous. Every anatomist who handled the material arrived independently at the same estimate of its age, and the estimate was not controversial, because the archaic features were too many and too deep to belong to anything recent. 2 million years, give or take. The bones had not yet been dated when those judgments were made. When the dating was finally done, the answer came back at roughly 1/10 of that figure. The dating took 4 years, and the delay was not incompetence. It was the absence of anything convenient to measure. The classic South African cave sites can sometimes be pinned down by volcanic ash layers or by clean stratigraphy, where older material sits demonstrably beneath younger material. The chamber offered neither. The sediment was disturbed, the deposit had accumulated in a way nobody understood, and the flowstones that might have bracketed it were sparse. On top of that, every reliable direct method destroys a piece of what it dates, and the team was reluctant to burn fossil material until the procedure had been agreed in advance. What they eventually agreed on was unusually stringent. Paul Dirks, at James Cook University in Australia, coordinated the work with a large group of specialists, and the results were published in 2017. 6 independent techniques were applied and cross-checked against one another. Uranium-thorium dating on the flowstones that had grown over the deposit. Electron spin resonance measured directly on Naledi teeth. Paleomagnetic analysis, reading the reversals of the Earth's magnetic field recorded in the sediment. Uranium lead on the surrounding rock. The critical measurements were run in 2 separate laboratories, each blind to what the other was finding, and the ages were submitted before anyone compared them. The answer was 335,000 to 236,000 years ago. Take a moment with that figure. because the anatomists had said 2 million. This is not a refinement. It is out by more than 1.5 million years, which is roughly the entire span of Homo erectus. Now consider who else was alive inside that window. The oldest fossils currently attributed to our own species come from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco and date to around 315,000 years ago. That is inside the bracket. Neanderthal populations were established across Europe. Homo erectus was still present in Asia and would persist there for a long time yet. A creature carrying a ribcage, a pelvis, and a hand that looked 2 million years old was walking through southern Africa at the same moment the first members of our own species were appearing on the same continent. What that breaks is not a detail. It is the organizing assumption underneath a century of the discipline. The working method has always been that anatomy is a rough clock. Brains get larger, faces get flatter and smaller, bodies stop being built for trees. Curved fingers mean old, small brains mean early. Given a skeleton and no date, you read the date off the bones, and for 100 years that read has been close enough to be trusted. Naledi is the case that shows the clock was never a clock. It was a correlation, holding for as long as we only had the fossils that happened to fit it. One limit deserves stating plainly because it is routinely misreported. Those 2 dates bracket the deposits in that chamber. They do not describe the lifespan of the species. They do not tell us when Naledi originated, and they do not tell us when it disappeared. You will frequently see it claimed that this was a species that lasted about 100,000 years and was therefore short-lived by hominin standards. That figure is simply the width of the uncertainty on a single accumulation of bodies. Naledi may have existed for 1 million years before that chamber filled. It may have persisted well after. Nobody knows, and nobody currently has the evidence to find out. If the body was that archaic and the date was that recent, one question follows immediately. The brain. And the brain answer was stranger than the body answer. Skull volume in Dinaledi runs between 465 and 610 cubic centimeters. A modern human brain averages around 1,350. So this is less than half of ours, and comparable in raw volume to the brain of a human infant in the first few months of life. It is small in absolute terms, and it is small relative to Naledi's own small body, which is the measure that usually matters more. On every existing scale, this is a creature that should not have been capable of much. Then Ralph Holloway at Columbia University took the inside of the skull apart. The technique is called endocast analysis. The interior surface of a brain case carries an impression of the outer surface of the brain that filled it, and if you have enough fragments of skull, you can reconstruct that impression. Dinaledi produced 5 partial endocasts. The results were published in 2018, and they did not match the size. The frontal lobe is organized like ours, not like an Australopithecines, which is the pattern every other small-brained hominin has shown. The region that corresponds to Broca's area in modern humans shows the same asymmetry between left and right that ours does. The constriction behind the eye sockets, which is heavy and pinched in archaic forms, is reduced. The temporal and occipital regions look derived rather than primitive. In shape and organization, this is a brain built on the recent plan. It has simply been made at half scale. The discipline had quietly assumed those 2 things traveled together. Get bigger, get reorganized. Dinaledi separates them. The wiring, as far as the outside of it can be read, arrived without the volume. That last qualification is not a formality, and it needs stating in full. An endocast records the outer surface of the brain and nothing else. It does not record neuron density or connectivity or anything that happens beneath the surface. Nobody can convert a frontal lobe shape into a language capacity, a toolkit, or an intelligence. What the endocasts establish is that Naledi's brain was not organized the way its size predicts. What they cannot establish is what that brain was doing. The obvious way to test it would be the tools. There are none. In more than 2,000 recovered specimens across 3 chambers, not one stone flake, not one core, not one worked fragment of anything. So the surviving evidence for how Dinaledi lived comes from the teeth. Ian Towell and Joel Irish at Liverpool John Moores University examined the dental collection and found 2 things that pull against each other. The teeth are small, which is a recent trait, but the molar crowns retain a primitive form, and the enamel is thicker than the long-term trend across our genus predicts, which is the opposite of what should happen in a species this late. The where tells the rest. Chipping rates on Naledi teeth are extraordinarily high, far above what is recorded for modern humans or Neanderthals. That pattern comes from hard, gritty material passing through the mouth repeatedly. Underground plant foods, tubers pulled from the soil and eaten with the soil still on them. Whatever they were living on was rough enough to break their teeth on a routine basis. And running through the same collection is a second signal. Bands of defective enamel, laid down during childhood, appearing across many individuals at similar stages of development. Enamel records stress permanently, the way bone does not. These are children who repeatedly went hungry, or repeatedly got ill, and whose teeth kept a record of it. There is one remaining way to test what a brain like that could do. It means going back down to the chamber. Before that, there is a harder problem, because nobody can say what Naledi actually is. Placing a species on the family tree normally means finding the relatives it most resembles and working outward from there. With Naledi, the resemblances point in different directions depending on which end of the skeleton you measure. The skull is the clearest signal. In its overall proportions, in the shape of the brain case, in the structure of the jaw and the brow, it sits closest to the early members of our own genus, to Homo erectus and the forms around it. Those are creatures from roughly 2 million years ago. The skull looks like theirs at a quarter of their age. Below the neck, the body matches nothing consistently at all. David Dembo and colleagues ran the problem properly in 2016, using a dated Bayesian phylogenetic analysis, which takes the anatomical traits and the known ages of every candidate species and calculates which arrangement of the tree requires the fewest improbable coincidences. The result placed Naledi as an early branch. Its lineage separated from the line leading to us somewhere around 900,000 years ago at the latest, and quite possibly a great deal earlier than that. Sit with what that implies, because it is the point where this stops being a curiosity and becomes something harder. Naledi did not evolve backwards. Nothing about it suggests a species that acquired modern features and then lost them. What the analysis describes is a lineage that split off early, carrying the anatomy of its time, and then essentially stopped. It kept the curved fingers and the flared pelvis and the small brain case, and it carried them forward unchanged for something in the region of 1 million years, while the branch beside it turned into us. It is not a missing link. It is a relict, a pocket of deep ancestry that was still walking around long after the body plan it belonged to had vanished everywhere else. The human family tree gets drawn as a ladder, or as a sequence of replacements, one form giving way to the next. What Naledi shows is overlap, several kinds of human radically different in build and in brain size occupying the same continent in the same centuries. There is a minority position worth naming and setting down. A small number of researchers have proposed that Naledi's mixed anatomy results from an ancient interbreeding event between early Homo and Australopithecines. The support for it is thin. No genetic material has ever been recovered from these fossils, and it is not where the field currently sits. It exists, and that is as much as can honestly be said for it. Why the lineage ended is a shorter answer, because there is almost nothing to work with. Their size makes them plausible prey for leopards and hyenas, and predation was presumably a constant. Curiously, large carnivore fossils are scarce around the site, which most researchers read not as evidence that Naledi was dangerous, but that the region was rugged and poor in game, so predators hunted elsewhere. The enamel defects point to an environment with hard seasons, where illness and hunger arrived on a schedule. Beyond that, nothing. No extinction horizon, no final layer, no last individual, and a species that held a single body plan steady for 1 million years while the world changed around. It does not look like something that was failing. Persistence on that scale is a success by any standard paleontology uses, which makes the disappearance harder to explain, not easier. Which brings us back to a chamber 18 centimeters wide, 30 meters underground, in absolute darkness, and to the only piece of Naledi behavior anyone has ever claimed to identify. Set out the physical problem as it stands. There are 15 or more bodies at the bottom of a passage that can only be entered feet first through a gap 18 centimeters wide, 12 meters down, in total darkness. Surveys have found no evidence of a collapsed second entrance that might once have opened directly onto the chamber. The bones carry no carnivore damage, no puncture marks, no gnawing. There are no animal remains mixed in with them, which is what a natural death trap produces, because a hole that swallows one kind of creature swallows every kind, and the accumulation happened slowly, across a long span of time, not in a single event that might be explained by one flood or one collapse. Something put those bodies there repeatedly, over generations. In 2023, Lee Berger, together with John Hawkes and Agustin Fuentes, published the claim that Naledi did it themselves. Deliberate disposal of the dead, bodies carried down through the fissure and laid in depressions dug into the chamber floor. Alongside the burial claim came two others, cross-hatched markings engraved on a dolomite pillar near the entrance to the chamber, and evidence of controlled fire, charcoal, and burnt bone in the passages leading down. If any of that holds, it moves the oldest known intentional burial back by roughly 100,000 years, and it hands the behavior to a creature with a brain half the size of the ones we credit with inventing it. The response was severe, and it deserves as much room as the claim. The papers were submitted to the journal eLife, which publishes its peer reviews openly. The reviewers concluded that the evidence presented did not support the conclusions drawn from it, and they said so in print. Maria Martinon Torres, Chris Stringer, and Michael Petraglia have all argued publicly that the burial case is not made. A reanalysis of the sediments published the following year questioned whether the claimed grave cuts are features at all, rather than natural depressions in a disturbed cave floor. The engravings are undated, and no method currently exists to date them, so there is no way to demonstrate that Naledi made them, rather than someone entering the cave far later. The fire evidence has still not appeared in a peer-reviewed publication. The alternatives are not fanciful. A death trap remains possible if the chamber's access was different in the past, though the missing animal bones argue against it. Gradual accumulation across thousands of years could be driven by water moving material into a low point. And there is a third option that sits between the two and gets less attention than it deserves. Moving the dead away from the living is not the same behavior as burial. It is a lower bar, it requires no ritual, no belief, and no symbolism, and it is observed in animals we do not credit with any of those things. Carrying a body somewhere it will not attract predators to the group is practical. It would still mean Naledi went down that fissure on purpose in the dark, carrying something. The honest position is that the accumulation is genuinely difficult to explain by natural process, and that difficulty is not proof of intent. Both readings remain live. Neither has been settled, and given the state of the site, neither may be settled soon. Whichever answer eventually holds, notice what it does not change. The bodies are still down there, the date is still 335,000 years, the hand is still curved and the thumb is still modern, and the brain is still half the size it should be for the shape it has. Go back to the two men in the crack in the hillside. A lamp, a floor of bone, and 18 centimeters of dolomite standing between a species nobody knew existed and a discipline that had assumed the question was largely closed. For a century, the shape of a bone was treated as a date. Curved fingers meant old. Small brains meant early. The tree was drawn as a sequence because the anatomy appeared to run in one direction, and it appeared to run in one direction because we only had the fossils that happened to fit. Naledi did not break the timeline. It exposed the fact that the timeline was an assumption, built at a moment when there was too little evidence to know better. The question was never how something this ancient survived so late. It was why we ever believed that being old and being early were the same thing.